Okay, this is a story from my latest book, Some Bruising May Occur. The story's called It's Already Gone. I'm not sure why I decided to look for the camera that morning, or even why I thought to look for it at all. Call it a whim, call it a random act of nostalgia. I just don't know. I don't know much about anything anymore. I found it quickly in one of the cardboard boxes standing in a line in the hallway against the wall. Near the top of the box, underneath one of her neatly folded sweaters, the one with the cat faces stitched across the chest. The camera was an entry-level digital model, years out of date, basic. I couldn't even remember where we'd bought it, or the last time we'd used it, if we'd even used it at all. We were never a big family for photographs. We rarely took them, and when we did, they seemed to get forgotten about quickly. The camera didn't need charging. It showed all 4 bars on the little icon, indicating a full battery. In retrospect, that fact alone should have struck me as odd, but it didn't. I checked the camera and the memory card and there were no photographs saved on there. We probably never used it at all after cracking open the box it had come in. Like a lot of things that we'd brought into our lives, it had been set aside and ignored. Back then I was drinking a lot. We both were. It used to mess with our thought processes. We did things without thinking and forgot about them immediately afterwards. I photographed the kitchen first, just a few snapshots. I took a picture of the sink with the little window above it, its yellow curtains turned dull against the grubby glass. Another of the wooden table, where we all used to sit and eat breakfast together at weekends. Then a few more taken at random, not even thinking about subject or composition. There was no real intent behind my actions. I was bored, restless. I needed something to do but didn't know what. When I scrolled back through the photos I'd taken, viewing them on the little screen at the back of the camera, I saw them again in various natural poses. Helen was standing at the sink, sleeves rolled up, looking out the window, sunlight in her hair. They were all sitting at the low table, frozen in the act of eating a meal. Helen and both kids, wan little smiles on their faces. In the last picture, one of Helen's legs could be seen in the doorway, the rest of her body having passed through. Flat surfaces in the kitchen, the kids' wide eyes, their small hands. I went through the house taking pictures, every room. The bedrooms were the worst. Those pictures hit me the hardest. Helen was lying asleep on a double bed, the covers pulled down to expose her naked shoulders, eyes shut tight, arms outside the covers, hands held in loose fists. The kids were in the bunk beds, covers pulled right up to their pale throats, faces lost in shadow. After that I decided that I needed whiskey. I didn't care how early it was, that the sun was not yet past the yard arm. I just needed a drink, so I got one. I could never find any pots and pans to use to cook dinner, but somehow I always managed to put my hand to a bottle or a can. With the whiskey bottle in one hand and the camera in the other, I walked outside into the pale morning sunshine and stood in the front garden. The street was quiet, the school run was yet to begin, the lawn was overgrown and the planted borders had been taken over by weeds. The hedges along the front of the property needed trimming back. I rattled off a few more shots, this time of the outside of the house, making sure the windows were in frame, red brick, timber-dawn window frames in need of a coat of paint. When I looked at these new photos, the kids were visible in the living room watching TV. They were sitting together on the sofa, as they always had done, faces wide open and taking it all in, enjoying the show. Their eyes shone with borrowed images. Helen and I were in the kitchen. We were dancing, or that was how it looked. I was holding her and she was holding me. Her head was resting on my shoulder and my arms were wrapped around her waist. I couldn't tell if it was a memory or a fantasy of how things might have been. I'm sure we must have danced in that kitchen at some point, but I couldn't remember when or to what music. We looked a little younger in the photos, but not much. I'd guess I'd have said a couple of years. I switched off the camera and went back inside, sat on the bottom stair and drank again from the bottle. The house sealed me off from the sound of the outside world, keeping me safe. There were things going on beneath the surface that I couldn't understand, but I'd spent my life feeling that way, aware that what I saw wasn't necessarily what was really happening. The skin of the world was thin, and whatever writhed beneath it was fat and sluggish. The alcohol went down as easy as ever. It was like drinking juice, tasteless juice. I put the now half-empty bottle aside and went upstairs for a shower. Once I was dressed, I looked okay, as if it was just about holding things together. My eyes were redder than they should be, and my skin was pale, but I thought it could pass for sober. Grabbing my car keys, I left the house and backed the car out of the driveway. It was a short drive to my sister's place, and I couldn't think of a reason to cancel our lunch. I had nothing else to do, nowhere else to go. Half an hour later I was parking on the narrow street outside a house. I shut off the engine and watched a man delivering a parcel several doors down the street. He looked happy. He kept smiling to himself as he walked. His inner life was laid bare. He was the king of his own world. I got out of the car and walked up the path to my sister's door. I wasn't sure why I'd brought the camera, but it was in my hand. I knocked on the door and waited for her to open it. "Hi Pete." Kathy looked tired. She always looked tired. Come on in. I followed her through to the kitchen. The place was messy, but it was cleaner than the last time I'd visited. You want some coffee? I nodded, sat down at the table and set down the camera in front of me. How have you been? She didn't look me in the eye when she spoke. Instead, she busied herself making the coffee and pushing dirty breakfast dishes into the sink. The same, always the same. I sensed the tension in her body. Are you still drinking? I couldn't be bothered to lie. Yeah, a little. Not as much as before. Mostly. She sat down in the chair opposite and looked at my hands. It seemed like ages before she looked at my face. Is that true, or just what you think I want to hear? I shrugged. I still miss them. The pain doesn't go away. The only thing that helps is if I have a little drink. That's always been your way, hasn't it? A little drink. But you never did understand the damage it causes to the people around you. In time, all those little drinks add up to one big drunk. Very profound, I said. She was being cruel to be kind. It wasn't helping. It's been 18 months, Pete. They aren't coming back. They've moved away, far away from you and your little drinks, and they're making a new life for themselves. You're probably never going to see them again. The quicker you accept that, the better it'll be for you. I still miss them. I was stuck in a loop. My vocabulary wouldn't move on from that phrase. The words defined what was left of my life. Kathy reached out a hand across the table and brushed her fingertips against the side of my wrist. Her fingernails were ragged where she'd bitten them down to the wick. I could barely feel the contact. It was like being kissed by a shadow or touched by a small waft of air. Why did you get the camera? I found it in a box. We must have bought it ages ago. I'd never known you to take photos. I didn't think it was your thing. She kept her hand where it was, resting gently against the skin of my wrist. Can I show you something? She took her hand away. Of course. You can show me anything you want. I picked up the camera and switched it on, accessing all the photos I'd taken earlier. I handed it to Kathy. Look at these. Tell me what you see. She raised the camera and began scrolling through the images. I see the rooms of your house, and then the outside. Just pictures of your place. What's this about? My throat was dry. Are there any people in the pictures? She shook her head. No, Pete, there aren't any people. Just empty rooms and boxes you'll never take to the charity shop. You screwed it all up. You know you did. They won't be coming back. She put down the camera and stood, moving away from the table towards the fridge. Is tuna salad okay? I made it earlier. I felt like crying, but no tears would come. They never did. They just backed up inside me, creating a reservoir of pain. I had no idea how much of it I could take before the barriers came down and all flooded out into the world. As we ate, we talked about everyday things like the weather, politics, the sorry state of the local park and playground. It seemed to me that we'd pulled back from the truth and started juggling little lies, as if that was all we could do to hold back the darkness. I loved my sister, and she loved me, but sometimes love isn't nearly enough to fix what's been broken. After lunch, I went outside and looked at Kathy's garden. Despite the messy house, she liked to plant flowers and keep things outside looking pretty for the kids. They'd be home from school soon. I knew they'd like to see me, but I didn't feel as if I could act like a normal person. Not today. Kneeling to take a closer look at the flowers, I grasped for beauty, but couldn't quite get there. I reached out and rubbed a rose petal between my forefinger and thumb, some part of me expecting the colour to come off like dust on my fingers, exposing the fraud. Nothing seemed right. Everything was slightly off, not quite what it was supposed to be. I blamed the alcohol. Sometimes it put a filter across the world, making things seem vague and artificial. I turned around and took a few pictures of the house, snapping them off quickly before I changed my mind. When I looked at the images, there were no people standing behind the windows or in the doorway. There was nobody there. They were long gone. There was just a house and a garden and the memories of the people who used to visit this place. I went back inside and kissed my sister goodbye. She used to smell of cheap perfume and cigarettes, but now she smelled of nothing. Same time next week. I looked at her tired face, those worn-out eyes of indeterminate colour, the dyed blonde hair that would never regain its former lustre, the sagging cheeks, the downy hairs of her upper lip. Unlike the filtered experience out in the garden, this was too much reality to take in. It felt like I was being force-fed an unpalatable truth. And how did I look to her? Did I even resemble the man I had once been? Yeah, I said and turned away. I wanted to say more, to at least tell her that she was an anchor to me, but I didn't know how. I drove back home with the radio on, but couldn't find a song to help shape the moment. It was all too bland, lacking in depth or substance. When I reached the house, I sat in the car for a while, staring at the windscreen, but not through it, not beyond it. I tried, but my vision wouldn't stretch that far. The steering wheel was cold in my hands. After a while, I got out of the car. For some reason I still don't understand, I raised the camera and took a single photo of the upper part of my house, the eaves and the slates on the roof. I stared through the viewfinder for a long time, trying to pick out something that shouldn't be there, but it didn't appear. When I looked at the photo on the screen, some other me was standing there on the edge of the roof, staring right into the lens. This image of me held a whiskey bottle in its hand. The expression on its face was largely unreadable, but it seemed to me that it contained at least a small amount of rage. From my vantage point on the ground, I had no idea what I, or some version of me, was doing up there, on the roof. Lowering my arm and letting the camera drop into the ground, I turned to look at the street. A few cars passed by, but not one of them stopped. None of the drivers or the passengers paid me any attention. I was simply a man hanging out on his front lawn, with a ghost of himself standing on the roof behind him. My world barely even interacted with theirs, they only touched at the edges. The house loomed over me, casting a shadow I couldn't see. The world stopped breathing, and for an instant it held its breath, suspending me there in the moment. I felt poised at the edge of something. When I looked down, the earth beneath my feet seemed to tremble. Then the image blurred and began to shift. I saw grey tiles start to form and felt the sensation of being perched up high, looking down. I closed my eyes. When I opened them again, everything was the same as before. Nothing had changed. I was not standing on the roof. I was rooted to the cold, hard earth. The broken camera lay at my feet. Somehow the whiskey bottle was back in my hand. I had no recollection of going inside to get it. I had the feeling that I had missed something, but only by a fraction of a second. It had been so close, this thing. Close enough to catch a glimpse of, but not to touch. And now it might be gone forever. I didn't dare turn around in case there was nothing more to see. No garden, no house, no landscape that I knew. I waited, and slowly, softly, the world began to breathe again.